Doom. A majority of the people who have touched a video game know about Doom, whether it's the 2016 soft reboot, or the original 1993 classic, or the movie, starring The Rock, that doesn't need any more discussion. The game has stood the test of time in more ways than one, and with the recent release of Doom Eternal, I want to talk about the two more recent titles in the game series for a little bit. But let's consider the next couple minutes grandma minutes. My granny is a lovely lady, and sometimes she watches these videos, but doesn't really know what I'm talking about. So, here's a little context as to what Doom actually is. Developed and released in 1993 by id Software, Doom was the follow-up to Wolfenstein 3D. Replacing Nazis and the Third Reich with demons and hell itself, you played the Marine, dubbed Doomguy by the community, who shot and fought his way through their ranks until the game was over. The game wasn't without turmoil throughout its development, much like most games in the 90s. Tom Hall, the credited lead designer, was fired 10 weeks before shipping the game because he was fed up with his ideas being tossed aside, including his original pitch called the Doom Bible, which would have taken the game in a much more different, more story-heavy direction. It popularized John Romero and Sandy Peterson as designers, with their levels inspiring pretty much the look and feel of old fan-made Doom levels from then on out. It also pushed John Carmack to the forefront of legendary status, for his work on the Doom engine and subsequent work on Quakes and the rest of id Tech, before his departure from id Software to pursue virtual reality. Adrian Carmack's art, rife with satanic influence and grotesque designs, was converted into the monsters of Phobos, Mars's demon-infested moon, as you blasted away at them. Doom 2 followed, with its major addition being the Super Shotgun and harder, more thought-provoking levels. 1996 hit, and Quake was born. An entirely new first-person shooter game from id, it revolutionized the genre by having the entire world in 3D. Eventually it spawned two sequels, Quake 2 and Quake 3, which would set the video game world ablaze not by themselves, but for what they did for video games. John Carmack and id's engines have been used the world over, with remnants of code from Quake 3 still lingering in Call of Duty games up to about 2010-2011. Quake 2 was the basis of Gold Source, the engine that ran Valve's revolutionary Half-Life game, eventually morphing into the long-running Source engine. What Quake did for video games was what Doom did previously. While Doom gave way to the popularity of the first-person shooter genre, with Doom clones littering the market for years, it was also Doom's massive success that allowed for Quake to be born and eventually pushing the first-person shooter genre to the position that it holds today. Doom is incredibly important. Gone were gimmicks like lives and points. Just getting to the goal alive was your goal. As soon as Doom did it, the rest of the genre followed suit. Then, amid the 2000s, id quietly floundered, bought out by ZeniMax, owners of Bethesda, and with Doom 3 and Rage not hitting the same way that they seemed to intend. In 2016, as we all entered Doom's newest soft reboot, there was trepidation about whether or not it'd suck. And it didn't. In fact, in 2016, I called Doom my number one game, comparing it to a meat grinder and other lovely sentiment. But really, Doom is a far deeper game than it lets on, and it doesn't let all the bits and pieces that make up this glorious software stand in its way. Everything about Doom builds upon what made the original two games what they were. Layers of nail-biting areas that constantly have you on the edge of your seat, because you're not entirely sure you'll make it out the next fight alive, and a thin layer of exploration, masqueraded as a puzzle element that's a holdover from the previous generation of Doom games. But Doom looks deep into the abyss of id Software's library, pulling out of its murky waters a box with a 9 Inch Nails logo on it. The sweaty, oozing pus from a bygone era seeps into the crevices of the hand's skin, infesting itself within the core of the livestream of what made Doom Doom. Doom 2016 rips and tears at the grim history of Quake, taking with it the fast-paced and head-on action that it encouraged players to take on back in the 90s. This is what makes Doom 2016 so good. It doesn't just recreate Doom, but the memory of all that id was and will be, ditching the cowardly behaviour of poking out just to take that one shot, but the frantic nature of having to hunt the enemy down just to be sure it's done. The game entices you further in by having you beat the shit out of the demons, and if you don't, they'll beat the shit out of you. This isn't just in the fact that the game introduces one of the more favourable mechanics from Warhammer 40k Space Marine, where killing enemies in a showy fashion is rewarded with health, ammo, and a moment for the player to breathe, but that every encounter is more fun the deeper you dive into the mix. There's no point taking on the hulking brutes from afar when you have a chainsaw. Doom constantly pushes you forward, and by constantly pushing you forward, it's to have fun with what it has on display, because the more you do, the more it can egg you on, and the more it spits ammo out so that you can continue to kill the thing that spawned from a pentagram on the floor. The only time the game will panic you is when you're low on ammo. This isn't even like a dude, it's like a, oh for fuck's sake. Another jolt of energy trickles into your brain as your machine gun putters to a slow stop. Their death will be your reward. Doom 2016 pulls the bits of history back to the present to generate a game that's as mindless, gory, and ridiculous as mums in the early 2000s were worried about. But it does so with style. A heavy sense of black humour follows it around as the Doomslayer destroys years of work or smacks away bullshit exposition because he just can't believe you guys fucked this up again.
We can work together and resolve this problem in a way that benefits us both.
If he spoke, it'd be this non-stop scream of anger, raging through every bone, and only a sigh of relief when he can murder shit again. This would usually be followed up by another scream of anger, as a rocket fired from his vague direction lands square in the face of a demon he thought he was done with. Doom's soundtrack, praised for its production values and being really good music in its own right, thumps as the action heats up in a way that sucks you into the moment. Louder and louder. It creates this atmosphere of anger that you don't get from other shooters of the modern era. It's not about creating scenes of epic moments for you to rewatch on YouTube. You're making them by wiping the floor with a shotgun and pure adrenaline. Every encounter raises the stakes. It doesn't plateau because every instance of combat in this game needs to ramp up the difficulty, or it begins to lose what made Doom Doom. Enemies are introduced, followed by throwing you into an arena that you have to survive. Later in the level, something will be given to you, a new gun, an upgrade, or a mechanic, which you'll then use to decimate a similar arena, and that in turn introduces a harder arena where you'll have to put what you've learned to the test in hopes of surviving the upped ante. It's a glorious circle of survive, betterment, survive. Doom 2016 is by far my favourite shooter from the last few years, with the whole rip and tear mentality drawing me back in once again. It's filled with tidbits for fans of Doom, but honestly, I'm here to fuck shit up as fast as I can, as brutally as I can. And it's the only game that sincerely allows me to do so, all the while egging me on to do it again in the next area. Then they announced Doom Eternal. When you have something good, it's always best to try something a little different the next time around. But never to do it so wildly different that it completely alienates what people wanted. What did people want from Doom Eternal? Mick Gordon, shotguns, demons, violence, fast action and more ways to shoot things. What did we get from id Software in 2020? A weird rambling love letter to the entire concept of video games in a way that has me concerned in some capacity. Like, they kinda did everything here. No, really. I don't know where to begin with Doom Eternal. The new feel of movement, skills and cooldowns, how it flips everything that Doom 2016 set up on its head, platforming. Seriously, Doom Eternal could have just been another Doom 2016 and I would have lapped it up, but it isn't. It's a vastly different game while still resembling the core concept that it was birthed out of. Doom Eternal sees you back in the green suit of the Doomslayer, as Earth is once again fucked up by demons and hell begins to invade for nefarious reasons. Doomslayer, being the Doomslayer, is very angry about this and goes to work setting things right. While Doom 2016 laughed in the face of story, with few minor moments to divulge itself of its lore before storing it in an unlockable codex entry, Doom Eternal begins to expand on it in even more ways than one, and takes chunks of time to create a story out of not only Doom 2016, but the entirety of Doom as a whole. They updated Doom 64 and re-released it to link the old with the new. Doom Eternal literally refers to the Slayer as Doomguy. It does exactly what people wanted and immediately makes the pure rage of "you motherfuckers did this again" vibe from 2016 even funnier in hindsight. The way the story is presented in Doom Eternal is just the start of the rift between games. It still feels that the outdated quote from John Carmack still seems to linger in the design philosophy of Doom Eternal. That old quote of his where he says that story in a game is like story in a porn movie. It's expected to be there, but it's not important. We, in 2020, know this is pure bullshit, but Carmack's and the original id team's method of keeping story down to a minimum still seems to be here in Eternal. It is to the point that it doesn't futz around with even attempting to create a story that dips and weaves, instead just keeping it on the straight and narrow.
If sentinel holy blood is spilled on these grounds, you will lose all sovereignty here.
There's also the inexcusable use of the tired, boring, mortally challenged gag throughout the entire game.
Demon can be an offensive term. Refer to them as mortally challenged.
That was met with eye rolls back in the original showing off the game back at QuakeCon in 2018. I get it. You try and represent the UAC as this ultra-exaggerated version of a modern tech company and how they'd handle something like the demonic invasion of Earth.
Corporate says we should let them through!
But constantly hearing this shtick get trotted out feels like it themselves missed what made Doom 2016 so funny to begin with. There's maybe a handful of moments that actually encapsulate what made Doom 2016 funny. One of those is when Samuel Hayden, Doomguy's involuntary helper from Doom 2016, attempts to explain to the Doomguy that he cannot just blow a hole in the surface of Mars to get to his goal.
I understand. Searching the coordinates to the BFG 10,000 now.
You can't just shoot a hole into the surface of Mars.
Mars surface targeted. Safety.
Would you like me to disable the safety protocols?
But how does it play? Weirdly, at first. There's a lot to dig into, but Doom Eternal seems to be its own worst enemy at times. It seemingly wanted to upped the challenge from Doom 2016, but there is so much happening in Eternal that it becomes messy once the combat begins to get a little harder towards the middle of the game. It can flip between smooth, exciting, and genuinely one of the best games I've ever touched, to this horrendous mess that just keeps dumping on you in hopes that you fumble into a success. This is the biggest divide between 2016 and Eternal. Controlled chaos versus a looser grasp on said chaos. In 2016, every encounter had a demon in its place that would seemingly spawn in new ones to up the ante once the hordes were thinned. In Eternal, the same underlying theory is there, but it tacks on so many things that you find yourself swarmed that actively go against the go forth, rip and tear mentality. I found myself backing away, using a rune to slow down time just to get a bearing on what was going on, and mangling my fingers across the keyboard as Eternal tried to indoctrinate me into its ways. Because there is so much to manage, Eternal loses some of the core values of Chaos that it wants to maintain, and I think they realise this very early on, because the thing that Doom Eternal brings back, that John Carmack and John Romero threw out originally, was one-ups. Collecting one of these immediately throws you back into the fray, allowing you to recuperate and get back into killing demons. This to me is a signal that id knew they'd gone too far in some spots. If these weren't there, you can bet anything that this game would be called significantly more challenging, or something along those lines, just because of how often you'd need to reload. If it weren't for the one-ups, I'd probably have rage quit the game at least 3 or 4 times. Cooldowns infest the game now, a crutch to prevent you from being too powerful. While these can be mitigated slightly with upgrades, I also found them to be an extra step to reach the end goal of killing things. The chainsaw now runs on cooldowns, with the necessary 3 tanks to take down big bads, a rare commodity. Instead, it's used far more in this game, not as a get out of jail free card, but a resource collector as smaller enemies will continually respawn in some parts to allow you to fill up on ammo for larger enemies coming up. Armor can be popped out of enemies by setting them ablaze with a flame belcher, and the great and surprisingly still not tired of seeing them glory kills refill your health. And the new blood punch, which is just a big punch, is also refilled by these glory kills as well now. You'll later unlock a sword, which is just another hotkey to remember, and boy howdy did I waste it slaughtering minor enemies when I thought I should refill my ammo with the chainsaw, and accidentally try to chainsaw a bigger enemy instead of using the sword. It's so many tools that do so many different things that it's not confusing, but it feels like we're going way overboard for what could effectively be consolidated down into a more manageable, bite-sized chunk. I get it, you want us to allow the players more methods of murder, but the flamethrower attachment, I'd like it to actually kill things rather than just offer me the chance at a small shard of armor that's going to be immediately wiped off in the next encounter. I do think the game's biggest crime is putting so much emphasis on the super shotgun and immediately making sure that I can't just wander around blasting things with it after investing time into the upgrades for it. This is mostly because ammo feels so scarce throughout the whole game, because the need to hunt down smaller enemies and chainsaw them to pieces is such a crutch that the game leans on that it becomes irritating as you try to curtail multiple hell demons that you wind up just using the rocket launcher and hope to God that the next body you see on screen might potentially give you something along the lines of ammo because it's small enough to be taken down with one charge of the chainsaw. Am I sounding too negative? Well, before I get back into the negativity, I want to sing Doom Eternal's praises. The music once again is devastatingly incredible. When I watched the trailer with them recording it and the lead audio designer said they wanted to give the feeling of going through a heavy metal album, this game delivers on that promise.
We want the whole game to feel like a heavy metal album experience.
But it has this gravitas and ridiculousness in combining both deep hell audio aesthetics with futuristic sci-fi. I think the title music is one of the best tracks in the game. While you wander grotesque gothic depictions of castles, hell, and so much more, that just outright sells me on the whole thing as it presents its weird, ever-growing ridiculousness with a straight face. We do have to talk about the weapons outside of the super shotgun, which has a meat hook, and if you add the slowdown, and everything feels great. There's not one bad weapon, only underused weapons. The ballista I barely used because it's shared ammo with the plasma rifle, which tears everything to shreds and then explodes them. The regular shotgun now shoots grenades, and then you upgrade that and it shoots 5 grenades. It's just so satisfying to see that shot get launched, hit a spider's turret and immediately fuck up their day. There's still massive love for the BFG, and props to id for making the rocket launcher a weapon you want to use, rather than save for big moments. Because every single fight descends into madness that you need a rocket launcher for. When that overwhelming feeling doesn't take over, things flow smoothly. Like, this might be the best feeling shooter to grace us for a long time, since probably Doom 2016. You can go from glory kill to dash, blood punch, and then back to glory kill to finish off the rest with an incredible chain gun. Honestly, it might be harping on the overwhelming nature a little bit too much and the throw shit the player willy-nilly problems that the combat has sometimes, but when Doom Eternal works, it just works. Doom's 2016 sleek aesthetics are gone. A lot of the designs have returned from Doom and Doom 2, with demons taking on familiar old forms, outside the Hell Knight, which is still using the logical Doom 3 style to keep it separate from the Baron. But everything is vibrant and meaty. Cacodemons pop bright red, Barons of Hell have lost their pink hue in favour of a grey, but they burn bright red when taking damage. I could go on, but you get the gist. Everything might be utterly bananas on screen and can overwhelm at times, but the game makes it incredibly easy to follow the bigger threats with vivid designs, and is now far easier to find pickups in the world or gain armour as they take on their old, brighter looks. What I do enjoy is the reduction of introducing enemies via cutscenes. Being surprised that the Cyberdemon has made a return or the new snake enemies have infested the Horde throws a small curveball that feels manageable as you begin to change tactics for the first time they're introduced. However, this is sort of contradicted by the constant interruptions of how to specifically kill each enemy, rather than being told via the characters that are constantly shouting in your ear on what to do. They even do it in the boss fights, which kind of ruins the point of a boss fight. The updates to the older enemies, like being able to gag the Cacodemons with the grenade, are smart. I enjoyed the fights against the singular, bigger and recurring enemies, even if the Marauder is a genuine nightmare to deal with. Archviles wind up being slightly easier to take down thanks to the addition of the sword late game, but the Marauder goes against nearly everything the game sets out to do with the chase down mentality. It becomes a weird variation on Serious Sam as you dodge around, run backwards, and pop off a couple rounds until it dies. That, or you have godlike reflexes and can pull off something like this guy. The Icon of Sin fight is genuinely impressive. The scope of it, combining everything that made the Doom 2 fight so memorable, yet improving on the original idea and having one of the better combat encounters in the game, just amping everything up that both you and the demons can do to the max, it's a real thrill. But unfortunately, it's time to talk about Doom Eternal's biggest issue, and that's platforming. It's just busy work, in a weird attempt to pad out the game with sections to give the player a breather or something, even though you go back to the Fortress of Doom enough times throughout the game to break up the action. I call it busy work because there's only one real answer to these sections, and they're weird, stilted, frustrating, and just like every other platforming section in first-person shooters that have come before it, including the near-perfect Doom 2016, they're just terrible. At the start of this section, I spoke about how Doom Eternal was this messy love letter to video games, how it did everything and anything it could do to show its love by doing just nearly everything. Old designs, check. Fast-paced, old-school action with a modern twist, check. Cooldowns from games that I assume the designers fawn over, check. Platforming in a first-person shooter game which is always terrible and frowned upon, check. Too often I would continually screw up these sections only to be rewarded with several fodder enemies afterwards to restock. Much like the live system, in what I can only describe as id realising their fuck up. I don't know. Think what you want about them, I think they fucking suck and bog the game down with needless frustration when the game is already chock full of little issues relating to the frustration of being overwhelmed. Let's sandwich this negativity with something really positive and harking back to the love letter analogy. The level design. Good gravy, this might be outside the platforming one of the best games just to be in. It's like every person who touched the level had played a level from games of our past and just put them in. Huge open arenas in larger-than-life settings from Serious Sam, build engine-esque skyscrapers and cityscapes. Hell feels like what they've been gunning for since 1993, and I just really love the gothic castles that feel ripped right out of Quake. It feels like everything was genuinely built with love for the genre. So that's Doom Eternal and Doom 2016. I think Doom Eternal is a good game. Is it as good as Doom 2016? No, not by a long shot. It has more stuff, I prefer the look of it, and some of the changes to the weapons I prefer, but I prefer my chaos ordered and thrilling rather than attempting to do everything all at once and going back on years of design work to compensate for overdoing it. Though, this said, it's nice to see id back making games that people really fucking enjoy. Hey, maybe I'll be able to grasp the overwhelming nature of the game, and I'll update this with a I was wrong video of me crying in front of a webcam. Doom Eternal, a weird love letter to just about everything in video games past and present, tried too hard, but still kinda kicks ass. But you can't best perfection. Doom 2016 represents so much. Yes, it was a return to form for id, but it also proved that the team behind it knew what they had to do. The limited, controlled scope of the game made it the perfect beast it is today. It was a meat grinder that the player had total control of. id knew what they had to do, and they managed to do it. They didn't lock people out, and they didn't overcompensate for a wider audience, knowing that they could be trusted to deliver an older experience, but a fresh one to a current audience that may have never played a first-person shooter game like this before. It not only recaptured what made Doom so great, but it recaptured what made id great. While they might not have shared their technology the world over like they used to, it revived the first-person shooter genre into something that what followed was incredible. If you go look at when Doom 2016 was announced and released, and what followed, Strafe, New Blood Interactive's whole lineup, a new Quake multiplayer game, Lawbreakers, Iron Fury, Wolfenstein's second outing leaning harder into the classic feeling, and so many more. It revitalized the FPS genre to do what it didn't do before, which is to get in there and make whatever the fuck you want. So while I don't think Doom Eternal lives up to Doom 2016, I'm glad it took that feeling to heart with this one. And you bet your ass I'm looking forward to their next game.